No one makes a better blade than your people. No one invents better ways to kill people than mine. A gun will never be as beautiful as a sword. But with a gun, you can take any sword you want. This is a direct quote from Abijah Fowler, the villain of Season 1 of Netflix's Blue Eye Samurai. And for me, it encapsulates his character. Fowler is the challenging outsider, a man who exists almost entirely outside the moral and social frameworks of the world he inhabits. In some ways, he embodies unrestrained will, operating in a vacuum created by traditional ethics. So, does that make him the equivalent of Nietzsche's Übermensch? Has he moved beyond good and evil? In today's video, the final one in my series on Blue Eye Samurai, I want to explore exactly that question. Welcome to another episode of Actually, It Is That Deep. Before we get into it, remember this show is not spoiler-free. I will be spoiling all of Blue Eye Samurai in this analysis. So if you've not yet watched the show and you want to watch it, come back after you've watched it. You have been warned. Okay, let's kick off by contextualizing Fowler. Who is Fowler? Fowler had what one might call a rough childhood, on steroids. As a child, he was orphaned during the Tudor conquest of Ireland and he lived through the resulting famine. He and his younger sister were forced to eat rats and nettles during that time, but even those meager provends ran out, and Fowler kept his sister alive for 2 weeks by feeding her his own blood. It wasn't enough. She ultimately didn't make it. After her death, Fowler fought off scavengers from mutilating her body for 3 days. Eventually, however, to stay alive, Fowler cut out and ate her kidneys before burying her. He bitterly refers to this as the last thing I ever did because I had to. This event is really core to understanding Fowler as a human being. Since that day, he strove to control his will, to be the master of his own fate. But that is well into the past, and by the time we meet Fowler at the start of the series, he has been in Japan for 2 decades, most of that time spent living as a veritable ghost in a castle. In a country that has slammed its borders shut to the polluting influence of the West, Fowler is one of only 4 white men remaining on Japanese soil. For 20 years, he has been confined to the sprawling frozen fortress called Hashiman's Breath in the far north of Japan. To the shogunate, he is their dirty secret, a prisoner kept for his knowledge of Western technology and trade. But we already know that Fowler doesn't do things because he must. That's the point of the story, right? So, prison or no, he sees advantage in being where he is. While the rest of Japan adheres to the strict, ritualized peace of the Edo period, Fowler has plotted a coup. He doesn't want to escape. He wants to install a puppet shogun and open the gates of Japan to the world, or more accurately, his world. He wants to do to Japan what the English did to Ireland, when you get right down to it. Now, I want to talk about that and how Fowler is the absolute poster child of hurt people, but before I do that, we got to talk about Nietzsche. Because to understand my thesis about Fowler, you have to understand Nietzsche, the often misquoted and frequently misunderstood. People have a tendency to read Nietzsche the way they read headlines. The shock value of the title sinks in, but the meat of the content gets lost in the shouting. And I'll give you this. Nietzsche had some provocative titles for sure, but I think his point frequently gets lost in the noise of edgelords cheering for the titles. And nowhere is this more evident than with the concept of the Übermensch. So, we have to unpack the Übermensch, and most of all, we have to understand the three metamorphoses that we can find in the spirit from Thus Spoke Zarathustra. When people hear Übermensch, they often think of a comic book superhero, or worse, a cold-hearted tyrant who does whatever he wants because might makes right, and the edgelords cheer. But for Nietzsche, the Übermensch, or overman, wasn't about physical dominance. It was about psychological and spiritual evolution. He believed that since the old world, the world of religious absolutes and traditional morality, was dying, humanity needed a new way to find meaning. We needed to become the architects of our own values. To explain how we get there, he gave us the allegory of the three metamorphoses. The first is the camel. The journey begins with a camel. The camel is the spirit of thou shalt. It is the stage of life where we carry the heavy weights of tradition, religion, and the expectations of our parents or society. The camel finds strength in its burden. It asks what is most difficult, and then it goes into the desert to carry it. Most people spend their entire lives as camels, following the rules, seeking honor, and doing what they are told because they believe the weight of carrying that moral burden makes them good people. But in the loneliest part of the desert, the camel must transform into the lion. The lion is the spirit of I will. The lion's job is to slay the great dragon, the dragon whose scales are covered in 1,000 years of thou shalts. The lion says no. It is the great destroyer. It rejects the old gods, the old laws, and the old masters. It seeks freedom. But here is the crucial catch that most people miss. The lion can only destroy. It cannot create. The lion clears the ground of the old forest, but it doesn't know how to plant new trees. It is a stage of pure but necessary rebellion. The final stage is the child. To Nietzsche, the child represents innocence and forgetting, a new beginning, a sacred yes. The child doesn't define itself by what it hates or what it destroyed like the lion. It creates new values out of pure joy and play. It is creative. It doesn't need thou shalt or even I will. It simply is. And this is where the misunderstanding happens. Many people, and many villains, think that because they've become the lion, they are the Übermensch. They think that because they've broken the rules and shown will, they've reached the peak. But for Nietzsche, a lion who never becomes a child is just a beast in the desert. They are trapped in a cycle of reaction. They are so busy saying no to the world that they will never learn to say yes to themselves. And that brings us back to Abijah Fowler. He's powerful, he's brilliant, and he has definitely killed his fair share of dragons. But as we look at his life, his philosophy of the gun, and that horrific backstory in Ireland, we have to ask, is he actually the Übermensch? Or is he just a lion who's been screaming no for so long, he's forgotten every other word? And here's the problem with that. A no isn't life. It's just reaction. And that brings us to the important element I want to discuss before we plunge into the role Fowler plays in the story. the difference between understanding a monster and letting him off the hook. Because while we can see the tragedy of the boy in Ireland, we have to look at the man in Japan and talk about responsibility. It's easy to look at Fowler's horrifying backstory and think, well, no wonder Fowler's a monster. We have a tendency in modern storytelling to treat trauma like a mathematical equation. Abuse plus famine equals villainy. But as a society, we can't actually live that way. If we treat every atrocity as a mere symptom of a past wound, we strip the individual of their humanity. We turn them into a machine that just reacts to inputs. And it's not true. There are many people who went through horrific backstories like that in Ireland who did not go out and slaughter people in other countries. And this is indeed where Jean-Paul Sartre would step in as Fowler's harshest critic. Sartre believed in the tension between facticity and transcendence. Fowler's facticity includes the famine, the death of his sister, and the white devil label that he wears in Japan. Those are the facts of his life that he didn't choose. But his transcendence is what he chooses to do with those facts. Sartre argued that we are condemned to be free. No matter how much blood Fowler was forced to drink as a boy, it didn't force him to become a colonialist mass murderer 20 years later. To Sartre, blaming your past for present evil is the ultimate bad faith. It is a lie we tell ourselves to avoid the terrifying weight of our own agency. And then we have Nietzsche, who would look at Fowler's hurt people vibe and call it out for what it is, resentiment, which isn't just resentment, it's a deep-seated venom where a person's entire identity is built on a reaction to their pain. It'll be the last time anyone ever forces me. Nietzsche's Overman creates values from a place of strength and abundance. Fowler, despite his massive fortress and his literal philosophy of the gun, is still acting out of scarcity. He is still that starving boy in Ireland, desperately trying to make sure no one ever makes him do anything again. Nietzsche would argue that by spending his life trying to get even with the world, Fowler has allowed his enemies, the English, the famine, the shogun, whoever else you'd like to line up, to win. He has let them define his soul. He thinks he's the master because he holds the gun, but philosophically, he's still a slave to his own trauma. As a society, we hold Fowler responsible because to do otherwise is to say he had no choice. And if he had no choice, then he is no man at all. He's just a force of nature, like a storm or a plague. Understanding his why helps us see his tragedy, but it doesn't change the what. He chose to be a butcher. And in the eyes of both the law and the spirit, that choice, and the blood on his hands, is his and his alone. Okay, so now we understand Fowler's starting point and his philosophy. It's time to turn to his role in the story. But before we get there, give me one moment to invite you to read Hidden Blade, the first book in my Sangwheel Chronicles epic fantasy series. Hidden Blade's main character is an assassin called Louis, who is faced with a dire question. Does he have any moral red lines? You can buy the ebook on my website right now for just a couple of bucks, and the full series electronic box set with human-drawn character art for 20 euros. And those files will 100% belong to you and are DRM free. The physical books might be available through my website. Otherwise, Well, there's Amazon. Okay, now let's talk about how Fowler is a foil to Mizu. Throughout Blue Eye Samurai, Fowler isn't just a villain for Mizu to kill. He is a dark reflection of what she could become. They are both outcasts, monsters in a world that has no place for them. But philosophically, they are moving in opposite directions, and both are hitting a wall. If we look back at Nietzsche's three metamorphoses, we can see the tragedy of their conflict. Mizu is the ultimate camel. She is defined by the weight that she carries. She carries her tainted blood, the weight of her master's sword, and the soul-crushing weight of her singular goal, revenge for being turned into a demon. The camel asks what is most difficult, and Mizu answers by choosing the hardest path possible, denying her womanhood, her happiness, even her humanity, to carry her burden across the desert of Japan. She lives by a strict thou shalt code, a code of vengeance defined by her culture. And for all that she holds the outsider status, she is trapped in the morality defined by that culture. She is a beast of burden for a past she cannot change. Fowler, on the other hand, has successfully become the lion. He has looked at the thou shalts of the world, the church, the shogunate, the British Empire, and he has roared, no. This is very clearly illustrated when we look at the scene where Fowler is in the chapel. In Peculiarities, episode 4, Fowler is in a chapel and idly observing a spider that's crawling over his hand as he chats to the carved figure of Christ on the cross. And he remarks that he never requested the chapel to be built. The Japanese simply assumed the white man required a chapel and put it by the dungeon. Fowler makes it clear he has never had either faith or regard for God, and believes that if God does exist, he would likely be as indifferent to Fowler as Fowler is to him. And then Fowler hedges his bets and says that if God does exist, Fowler sees a potential association with God as something that could benefit both him and a theoretical Christ. Fowler offers to strike a bargain with God. If his upcoming plot against the shogunate should succeed, he will take it as a sign of God's favor and both preach and financially support Christian institutions throughout Japan as a demonstration of this faith. Releasing the spider, Fowler then remarks as he leaves, "My thanks, if you see fit. It's no matter to me either way. I've got no use for souls." There's a lot going on in that scene, so let's unpack it a little. When Fowler says he never requested the chapel, he's pointing out that the Japanese leaders who built it assumed a thou shalt because they are camels who can't imagine a life without a master. But by entering and speaking to the carved Christ, Fowler isn't worshipping, he's interrogating. He has already killed the God of his childhood. To him, the cross isn't a symbol of salvation. It's just a piece of wood in a room next to a dungeon. Except maybe not quite, because he hedges his bets by bargaining just in case there's something there. But he does it not as a camel taking the burden of the religion, but as a lion. The bargain is the peak of the lion's arrogance. Usually a human submits to God's will. Fowler reverses that hierarchy. He tells God, if I win, I'll give you a franchise. I'll fund your churches as a reward for your cooperation. He is exerting his will to power. He is treating the creator of the universe as a political tool, a means to an end. In Nietzschean terms, he has moved so far into the master morality that he views even the divine as something to be negotiated with, rather than obeyed. The spider and the final remark, "I've got no use for souls," is the lion's ultimate no. To have a soul is to have an essence, a permanent moral core that can be judged. By rejecting the soul, by saying he has no use for it, Fowler is embracing the most radical form of existential nihilism. He is saying there is no inner Fowler. There is only what I do. There is only the power I exert. And he releases the spider not out of mercy, but out of total indifference. The spider's life and the souls of the Japanese people are equally weightless to him. This is the lion in the desert at his most isolated. He has destroyed all the weights, all the gods, all the thou shalts, leaving him in a world where nothing has value except his own desires. And that is why Fowler simply wins so much and for so long. He beats the shogun's advisors who are seeking to double-cross him. He marches on Edo and kicks the gates down. He kills the shogun. Why does he win like this? Because the camels cannot conceive of a lion who can simply bust through all the theoretical walls created by thou shalt. And the same applies to Mizu. She loses the first time she faces Fowler. She would have lost the second time, except she turned to fire. She sacrificed everything in order to win. I want to draw your attention to one other thing. When Fowler says to Mizu, "Biggest city in the world is burning to the ground as a blood sacrifice to your revenge. Oh, my dear, that's your white half showing. Maybe you are mine." He's doing something very insidious. He isn't calling her a lion. He's trying to colonize her. He's recontextualizing her struggle into a mold of his own making, telling her that her capacity for destruction is a European birthright, and that really she's a camel of that culture. And that is a pretty huge test for Mizu. Will she walk into that mold and become a camel to another culture? Or will she break free and become a lion in her own right? Or perhaps even a child who forges her own values? We'll have to wait for season 2. Hopefully not too long. But finally, I want to leave you with this thought. To Nietzsche, the Übermensch isn't the camel and it isn't the lion. It's the child. The child is the stage of the sacred yes. It is the ability to move past the burden, Mizu, and the destruction, Fowler, to create something new, something innocent, and something life-affirming. In Blue Eye Samurai, neither of those two are anywhere near the child. Mizu is too weighed down by her thou shalt to find the sacred yes. She is a spirit in a cage built on her culture's values. And Fowler is too addicted to the no to ever become innocent again. He is a predator who has forgotten how to be anything else. That is why their confrontation is so cataclysmic. It isn't just a fight between good and evil. It is a collision between a spirit that refuses to let go its burden and a spirit that refuses to stop tearing the world apart. So to answer the question that we started this video with, is Abijah Fowler the Übermensch? Absolutely not. He is a man who mistook license for liberty. He reached the stage of the lion, looked around the empty desert he created, and decided that the emptiness was all there was. He is a master who is still a slave to his own trauma. A lion who can never become the child because he refuses to forget the hunger that created him. Because, as Nietzsche knew and Fowler proves, it's one thing to break your chains. It's another thing entirely to walk away from the forge. And that brings us to the end of my analysis of Blue Eye Samurai. I could say a lot more about the show, so maybe I'll return to it, but since season 2 is coming out soonish, I'll definitely bring you my analysis of that season once it's out. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Fowler, the show, my analysis, and if you're looking forward to season 2. Oh, and while you're down there, do hit the thumbs up button or the hype button or both if you're so inclined. And next month, I'll see you for a discussion of Arc of a Scythe by Neil Schusterman. So make sure that you're subscribed for that.